Hello, welcome to episode 2 of The Real Public Servants. I am Angelique Crumbly, and
And I'm Angela McNerney.
we have decades of public service experience and want to share our wealth of knowledge with you. In today's episode, we're going to take a deep dive into the US government shutdown, focusing on the current shutdown, and we'll try to answer questions that so many people may have, like how did the shutdown happen? Who does it impact? When will it end? And so today we're recording this episode on the 15th day of shutdown, but any minute things could change or the shutdown could continue indefinitely. First, we're going to kind of focus on how did we get here. Then we'll focus on how the executive branch plans for a shutdown and how it manages during a shutdown. And then we're going to close out with some impacts of a shutdown, both for the economy as well as for just everyday average citizens. Now, historically, funding gaps have led to shutdowns since 1980, when Attorney General Benjamin Civiletti, he was the last Attorney General during the Carter administration, issued a legal opinion requiring it. Now, this opinion wasn't consistently adhered to throughout the 1980s, but since the 1990s, all funding gaps lasting longer than a few hours have led to a shutdown. As of October 2025, 11 funding gaps have led to shutdowns and federal employees being furloughed. The most significant of these include the 35-day shutdown of 2018 through 2019 during the president's first administration. And this was caused by a dispute over expanding barriers on the US Mexican border. The second longest, actually, Angela, you and I were fairly young in the government at the time. This
We
was the shutdown of,
experienced it.
yes, okay, yes, there you go, getting our experience. This was the shutdown of 1995 through 1996 during the Bill Clinton administration. And the reason the government shut down then was over opposition to major spending cuts and if you remember, that was during the time of the Newt Gingrich and the contract with America during that time, and it was really focusing on balancing the budget. And then the next longest shutdown was the 16-day shutdown in 2013 during President Obama's administration, and it was caused by a dispute over implementation of the Affordable Care Act, or the ACA. Now, the other 8 shutdowns lasted 5 days or less. And as we said when we started, we're currently on day 15 here, and you see our shutdown clock. I'm not quite sure where we picked this up, Angela, but you see the shutdown clock here. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to basically focus on those questions I talked about. How did we get here? Okay.
Mhm.
Then we're going to talk about the executive branch and how it plans for and manages through shutdown. And then we're going to talk about impact. So I want to turn it over to Angela, who's going to start walking us through how we got here. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So, as Angelique said, we are in day 15 of this particular shutdown. But yeah, as you said, how did we get here? Like, what part of the processes that are supposed to be working are basically are not working that led us here? So, as we touched on briefly in episode 1, and if you haven't watched episode 1, we encourage you to go back and if you have some time and check out episode 1. During the summer, if you go on to the next slide, this image here depicts the process, the the process actually that's in law, okay, um, that is supposed to happen to get from president's budget to a passed appropriation, okay, to an enacted appropriation. So, as we touched on briefly in that first episode, during the summer and over the fall and early winter, the executive branch agencies are building the budgets for their agency to send to OMB and to the White House, again, to be compiled with the president's budget. Once that's completed, the overall process begins. So well before the current situation, before we jump into the current situation, we want to briefly just give a little bit of knowledge and understanding about this process of appropriations. So as you see here in February, the president delivers his budget, supposed to deliver his budget again. And Angelique, you reminded, in a transition year, we have a new president coming in, new administration. Sometimes that is beyond the February period. Okay, sometimes it's March or April. Okay,
Mhm.
depending on when it is compiled and able to be submitted. Then the president sends that budget. Congressional committees decide the spending levels in the spring, and that results in this thing called a budget resolution. And then the 12 appropriation committees set the levels for each of the appropriations, and that happens over the summer in both the House and the Senate. Both sides have committees, and they set these levels for these 12 appropriations. We're going to show you the 12 appropriations, the titles of them, and talk a little bit about that in the next several slides. In August, you'll see here Congress recesses usually, right, and they go back to their constituents and they tell them all the great things that are in these budget proposals, right, that they are preparing in both their houses. Then they return in September, and then they vote on these appropriation bills, and those appropriation bills go from the House over to the Senate. And if the Senate makes any changes, then they have to conference with each other, and then there'll be a vote again in both sides. And then eventually, those appropriation bills get sent to the president, who signs them, and then they are enacted. Okay. So that's the way the process is supposed to work, and it needs to work by September 30th. If it doesn't work by September 30th, what else could occur is what's called the continuing resolution. And you're probably hearing a lot about this, which is a bill to continue operations of the government at some level. Generally, it's the prior fiscal year's levels, right? And they make some adjustments. Sometimes
Mhm.
they rescind some money in those continuing resolutions. But
Mhm.
a continuing resolution would need to be passed again by September 30th or by the expiration of wherever the end date is. So that's what you see here in this process. Okay. Now, I want to just take a step on to the next slide. Again, we talked about these 12 appropriation bills. Okay.
Mhm.
This is the way it's supposed to happen. So these are the titles of the 12 appropriations. These are the title of the committees as well,
Mhm. Mhm.
who are working out these funding levels and drafting these bills for both chambers. So, Angelique, I know you want to talk a little bit about 4 or 5 of these and a little bit about what we're hearing.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to remember is that these look general, but when you look underneath them, for example, the agriculture bill, that's where you're going to see spending on things like WIC and the SNAP programs and other kind of benefits, that help farmers and other things under the ag bill. In terms of the financial services, that's where you're going to see the Department of Treasury, you're going to see IRS, the spending for those executive branch agencies there. Um, Again, on the legislative branch, I just want to remind everybody that the Congress is paid per the Constitution, regardless of whether the executive branch of the federal government is shut down. Okay. So a lot of people have asked, well, why is Congress still getting paid? They get paid because that is a requirement of the Constitution. Then also you'll see state ops, state foreign ops there. That's where usually the foreign assistance, diplomatic programming, all of that is on the former foreign assistant side or the development assistant side. That is a very, very small amount, less than 1% of the budget. And we'll talk a little bit at some point about discretionary versus mandatory spending, but it's just important that as you're looking at all these bills, some are very large and have a lot of spending, others not as much. But just want to keep in mind. And then under transportation, that's where you're going to see FAA, and you hear things about the air traffic controllers and others. So while these are general or broad titles, there's a lot to unpack underneath them
Yep.
in terms of programming and different agencies and different funding sources under them. So
Yep.
just wanted to
Okay.
call attention to that.
Fantastic, fantastic. So again, there's 12 appropriation bills that are supposed to independently, right? Each one of these, again, the spending limit for everything is set, and then it gets broken down into these pots, right? And these committees work and they draft these bills. So again, each one of these, once they reach their ability to move on through committee and onto the floor and then between the houses, then they can move independently. Um, Unfortunately, this has not happened, and it has not happened at all this year. For this cycle of fiscal year 2026, the House has some of these appropriation bills that have made it out of committees, okay, but none of them have made it to the Senate. So the Senate has nothing to vote on these 12. The only thing the Senate has before them right now is a continuing resolution. So
Yeah.
if we could go on to the next slide here, just to talk a little bit about the current status. One more, please. Okay. So in here, what's different, what you see here is that we have we have a red X over what's broken right now, and it's because the committees and the floors have not passed any of these 12 appropriation bills.
And
Okay.
can I add a little, just to give
Yeah.
everybody a little context here? Angela had talked about the kind of the pure, the version before of how things should work. And this process is basically mandated by law. Since the modern budget system was established in 1974, okay, Congress has passed all of its required appropriation bills on time only 4 times. And the act actually is the Act of 74, and it came into implementation and or became effective in 1977. So basically, the last 48 years, we've only seen these bills passed on time 4 times. Now, the last time all 12 annual appropriation bills were passed individually and on time was for fiscal year 1997. Since then, basically, Congress has used the CRs, as Angela had noted, or in some cases, they've done what is called omnibus, or big kind of spending
Right.
bills where they consolidate some of these 12 and then just pass a big bill. But when you think about it, and in 48 years, we've only done it 4 times, and the
Right.
last time we did it was 28 years ago. So there's
Right.
clearly something broken with the process.
Yes. Yes. Clearly broken. Again, in our entire careers, right? It was only once that it ever
Yep.
happened that all 12
Yep.
were passed. Now there are many years in there where maybe four, five, three, or
Mm-hmm.
two, right, got passed, but then
Mm-hmm.
right, the rest of them got lumped together. And sometimes you end up what's called a partial government shutdown because
Mm-hmm.
you have 6 appropriation bills that actually make it to through to enactment with the president, and the other 6 don't. And so when those 6 that don't lapse, basically what happens is there's a lapse of appropriation for those agencies that are under that appropriation bill. So so where we find ourselves right now is that we're closed. I say we're closed because we have a lapse of appropriation, and we do not have a continuing resolution.
Correct.
Okay, so
Correct.
so that's a little bit about the process and how
Mm-hmm.
it's supposed to work, and how it
Mm-hmm.
hasn't been working, and
Mm-hmm.
where we find ourselves right now. So
Correct. So, if we're drilling down a little bit more, Angela, are we drilling into kind of where the positions are on each side? We
yeah,
can
we
drill down
right.
more unless you wanted to share
No, no,
something.
let's go ahead, Angelique, and have you talk about the current positions of
Okay,
of
I think we have a slide on that as well.
of
There
both.
it is.
Yep.
Yes. Okay. So, as we discussed briefly, and as Angela mentioned in the previous episode, the Big Beautiful Bill did a number of things, but primarily what it did is it extended tax cuts, it increased funding for border security, and reduced funding for Medicare and Medicaid and SNAP benefits, for example, by changing eligibility requirements. And this was done in essence to offset the tax cut extension. Now, these offsets are required by law to stay within debt limit ceilings. Okay. So when you think of, okay, well, there's the tax cuts and we hear about that, there is the requirement that we try to stay within certain levels. And so, in essence, if you're going to give in one area, you have to offset in another. And that issue is something that has been very contentious over the summer. Okay, now the Big Beautiful Bill was passed in July, and it was passed by a simple majority in both houses of Congress. It was the last legislation to pass before the upcoming appropriation bill or continuing resolution, as no appropriation bills have passed, as we said, both chambers of Congress. So consequently, if issues such as the extension of the ACA or the Affordable Care Act subsidies weren't addressed in the Big Beautiful Bill, then the next legislative vehicle to provide a fix would be the CR. Okay. And so this slide lays out both sides of that issue. So what you have is that the administration and congressional majority position is that a clean CR through November 21st should be passed, and issues about extensions of the ACA subsidies could be addressed once the government is funded. Any legislative fixes that would be included in this clean version of the bill are issues that aren't going to score or count against the debt, right? Or impact the debt ceiling. So, the issue of extending the tax credits for ACA, okay, to non-U.S. citizens that could benefit from the subsidies has also been a concern of the administration and the congressional majority. I do want to note that no numbers have been given that I've seen. I don't know, Angela, if you've seen any that provide an order of magnitude on that issue, but it is an issue that you hear, a number of people speaking about, including the Speaker of the House. So, in essence, the administration and congressional majority position is pass a clean CR, will then negotiate on the subsidies related to the ACA, or tax credit extensions related to the ACA. I've seen it both ways, subsidies and tax credit extensions. Now, the Senate minority position is that, in essence, because the Big Beautiful Bill did not address it, and a number of people would be impacted, their view is that any bill must include an extension of the Affordable Care Act tax credits or subsidies, and that this is very important because these subsidies are due to expire at the end of the year. Okay. But I want to note that open season, okay,
Right.
it starts November 1. And basically, that open season is when healthcare plans and changes need to be made. So many people are seeing, since it's November 1 and since the tax credits aren't going to be extended, people are starting to receive in the mail the increases in the insurance premiums that they're going to pay. And so what is really at issue in terms of the Senate minority is that with more than 24 million people using the Affordable Care Act health insurance marketplaces, and with open enrollment starting in November 1 and no guarantee of the ACA credits, health premium costs are going to skyrocket. They're expected in many cases to more than double. And this would basically price many families out of the ability to carry health care coverage. So the reality is there is no other legislative vehicle that can address this in the time frame but the
Right.
CR. And in essence, because it's an appropriation or continuing resolution, which appropriates money, you need 60 votes in the Senate. So this is
Mhm.
where, because of the narrow margins, you need the Democrats to also support the Republicans to get that bill out of the Senate. Is my understanding, and I lost count of how many times they
I think
voted.
the Senate has taken 8 votes
Is it
on
8?
the
Okay.
House rule, which is, yeah,
On the clean CR, and
on the
that's not
clean CR.
passed.
Mhm.
The Democrats have put forward an alternative CR language, and that hasn't passed either. And ultimately, the issue that has to be addressed is how is it going to score? Like, in other words, if there is some legislation and you do put the ACA subsidies or keep them in place, how is that going to work? What do you offset? How do
Right.
you ensure that the debt isn't over? And I believe the debt ceiling has been extended into January of
Yeah.
2026, which
Yeah.
is just
For the
around the
beginning.
corner as well. So, well, it could be that the answer is that the debt ceiling is extended to include, the ACA subsidies as well, and you don't have that offset. But again, we're not there. And so the real question is, okay, how are we going to end this? Right?
Yep.
How do we get to
Yep.
resolution and get the government opened back up?
That's right. So this right now is this is where apparently we're stuck. We, the president and the Congress, basically we're stuck here. Really a stalemate. There was
Hmm.
today. I didn't hear too much. I didn't hear too
I
much about
didn't.
any conversations that were occurring. I think that in the House, perhaps
Hmm.
the Speaker and the minority leader were. I don't know if they were speaking. I think they want
Well,
to
I
have
think
a
they might
debate.
have chatted. I mean, I think we also have to remember that as of today, we're at day 24 or 25 of the House not being in session.
Yeah, right.
So,
Yeah,
in essence,
y-
in some
y-
respects, there's the view that the House
yeah,
has already done their
right.
part. They voted and they sent the CR
That's right.
over.
They're waiting
Mhm.
for the Senate to either pass it or send them something back. Right.
Correct.
That's yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
So
All
that's
right.
where we are.
So yeah, before we jump into these statistics that you see here, we wanted to just talk a little bit about the process that the executive branch agencies use when they are planning for shutdown and when they have to execute on that plan. So the government has a playbook. It's had it for a long time. It's this circular again called A11. It's section 124 of that circular that basically lays out for all executive agencies uh, uh, the top line of how agencies should operate in the absence of an appropriation. Okay. And that's key to make sure you understand that this is a lapse of appropriation, which means that the
Hmm.
appropriation bill was not enacted. Okay. So, what we want to just very quickly here. So about 60 days prior to the expiration of an appropriation or the lapse of funding, the executive branch reviews its contingency plans. These plans lay out how the agency will operate in the lapse. It includes the number of federal workers that will continue to work in a lapse. Okay, these are your, we're just going to call them essential employees, but there are some very specific terms that the LAPS plans will use. Additionally, the plans include instructions about contractors and contracts. These plans are sent to the Office of Management and Budget and approved by the Office of Management and Budget and are posted on the public website of every executive agency. So that's about 60 days out. About 10 days prior to this lapse or potential shutdown, OMB begins what is known as shutdown planning calls. And OMB then relays to the agencies again. This is a telephone call.
Hmm.
Okay, there's very little writing that occurs between the 10th day and the midnight hour of September 30th. But so 10 days prior, there's these phone calls that happen nearly every day. The OMB relays to the agencies what's happening between the White House and the Hill, and provides instructions on what to release to the federal employees with regard to these negotiations or instructions. Okay. If there's still a possibility of a lapse in appropriations within about 48 hours of that, OMB instructs the agencies to release the instructions to the employees to begin to prepare. Now, Angelique and I, because we've been involved well, I shouldn't say we've been involved in many of
Many,
shutdown
many.
planning. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and this time is known as the "We Remain Hopeful."
Mm-hmm.
Right? We have this discussion of we
Keep
remain
hope alive.
hopeful, right? That the Congress will do its job and the president will sign and enact an appropriation before everything expires. So there's a lot of that happens in these 48 hours. Now, if we continue to plan, we continue to send instructions. Within 24 hours of the expiration of the funding, employees receive a notification that a shutdown is imminent and that they should begin to prepare for shutdown. And what that means, it'll include the instruction for them. You are to come into work, or you're to however you get into work online, and you have generally about half a day, about 3 hours to basically orderly shut down
Mm-hmm.
your operations, okay, your function. All
Right.
right. Um, so that's what happens. Now, if you are one of these employees that's considered essential, right, you'll get a different kind of instruction from your manager at the agency. Now, upon the expiration, so if we do get the lapse, immediately upon that, the employees who are going to be furloughed do receive their furlough notice. They say, as of midnight, whatever, 12:01 or whatever, you are now furloughed. Basically, you cannot, and by law, you cannot work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We do not have any money for you to work, and you cannot volunteer your services to the United
Mm-hmm.
States government. Okay.
Can't even log
And
on to your government IT.
no, you're not allowed to log on to your government equipment. You
Mm-hmm.
just put that away.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then basically it says, we'll tell you how you're going to hear from us.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, most of us, we listen to what in Washington, D.C. area was WTOP.
That's exactly right.
Right? And that's how we knew what was going on with
Mm-hmm.
whether the government was going to open up tomorrow or not
Or
open up
not.
tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so I wanted to say that these plans are very, very detailed
Mm-hmm.
plans, and every agency has them, and they will be updated. They can be updated through the shutdown period. As a matter of fact, IRS just updated theirs, and we have it here on the screen here. They just updated theirs on October 8th because they had enough carryover money.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's like we didn't talk about that, but some
Right.
agencies have a appropriation that they can carry in. Even if they don't have the new appropriation bill, they can still use it. It's for a very short period of time. So IRS
Yeah.
had till October 8th for their
Right.
employees. Then they had
And,
to
and
update the plan.
yeah, just to add to that, Angela, they had what is called a period of availability
Hmm.
that extended into the next fiscal year. There are also 2-year appropriations, and you see that a lot of the time for programming, right? And so if you have money on the program side, right, that goes, let's say we're in fiscal year right now 26. So say it was 25, 26 money, you can program it. The problem is usually the ops side or the operational appropriations that you don't have those, so you can't carry out the program, even though that's 2-year money. And then you have what is also known as no year money, and that in an accounting way is shown as X. They call it X year funding, and you see a lot of times humanitarian money for that. Those kinds of funding you can operate, and we are seeing it.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
We're seeing it with, for example, WIC funding. So at first, it was being reported in the New York Times that within 2 weeks there would be no funding to support the WIC program. And 41%, according to that article, 41% of children, low-income children, are take part of that program. So that would be a really, really horrible thing to
Yeah.
happen. The administration has used carryover or some other money that is available to be able to support WIC. We're also seeing it on the side for DoD, that there is some research and development funding that is available that they're reprogramming so that we ensure that the troops get paid at least, I don't know how long that money will last, but at least this pay period or maybe into the next pay period. So that's all of that piece of, thinking through what do we have on hand. You'll deal with the budget offices and they'll tell you, and that will be in your shutdown plan as well, as Angela was saying.
Exactly, exactly. So just some quick stats here. The CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, estimates that about 750,000 federal employees could be furloughed or would be furloughed. The numbers that you see here about furloughed employees, like a Department of Defense, the civilian workforce, because the uniformed workforce is not, they're not furloughed. The civilian workforce, about 335,000. You see ag, you see commerce, and you see the Internal Revenue Service. The Internal Revenue Service has been in the news, I know, lately over these last couple of days. Um, so you'll see some big percentages when you go to look at their plans. Like I said, they just
Was that
updated
because, Angela, there was a deadline that just passed, I believe, for those people who asked for a tax extension past the April 15th deadline? I believe the October, I'm not sure what day we're in,
8th.
8th.
So
So I think it would have been Monday, would have been that cutoff date for IRS. If you were filing late, I believe that was one of the reasons I think they were in the news, because it was like, are people filing? Is there anybody to receive it?
yeah, I mean, I know that there's a big concern, obviously, coming out of the big beautiful bill, that there's a lot of, right. There's the extension of tax
Hmm.
reforms that were in there, making them permanent. It's just there's a lot that goes into the tax planning for 2026 and the systems and all of
Hmm.
those things.
Hmm.
So I know that a lot of that has been in there as to, well, will we be ready? Will they be ready for generally, let's just say February of next year, to receive the tax returns for, well,
Right.
2025 tax
Right.
returns, right, as they're preparing
Right.
for
And
2026.
as
So
there have been changes,
yeah,
as you're saying, to the tax code. That's right.
right. Right. So, and then you'll see a list here of some, nearly all the employees at these agencies were expected to be furloughed. Again, I just want to point out that the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, actually, they have some fees. It gets complicated, right? We just talked about, we can't carryover funds, we talked about no year funds, and now I'm going to throw something in here called fees, right? So people pay, right, to have the patent office look at their proposed idea, and so they collect fees, and they are right now operating on these fees. And then when they run out of the fees, right? Because they're
Hmm.
they're probably not collecting new fees, right?
Right.
That's probably the piece that's stopped under the shutdown. But they currently have on their website that they are operating on the residual fees that they had, and then of course you'll see some of these other ones here that
Like, yeah.
yeah,
I don't know if you have state there, but state, the consular affairs, you have the fees that you're getting for visas
passport,
and
yeah.
passports. I don't think those would halt as a result of shutdown. However, those other entities that support consular affairs, they may be furloughed, and so then you might see longer wait times or something like that as a result of that, even though it's a fee for service,
Right,
entity.
right, yep. So before we jump into the cost of the prior shutdowns and some of these impacts, Angela, maybe we could just talk a little bit about this particular shutdown and
Yeah.
how it's a little bit different from what we
Yeah.
experienced, right?
Yeah.
I know we touched on it a little bit,
Hmm.
but and again, in the news today, this was in the news today, is that there are federal employees who are furloughed, who received their furlough notice, who also now are receiving notices of termination. they're
Mm-hmm.
being fired, right? So we
Mm-hmm.
had initially 4,000. I hear today that there's talk about 10,000.
Mm-hmm.
Today, I do believe that
Correct. They
the court
halted
stepped
that.
in and halted
Hmm.
the
And
4,000.
that is truly different than any other shutdown. That's what makes this different, because there has not been that discussion of, oh, are we going to fire those people that are not accepted, right?
Hmm.
And therein saying the activities that they carry out are not really necessary to government. They are, but when you're going through that process that Angela talked about of deeming what is considered accepted or essential. And,
Hmm.
that's really more in an emergency kind of look. But that doesn't mean that those that aren't on that list, that those
Right,
functions aren't key and important, right?
right.
A lot of times you look at life saving and you look at
Hmm.
other factors that come into
Right.
consideration. And
Protection of
so
assets and things like that. Yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So, and that's why you would see, the accepted personnel. But, there are many activities that are very important to keep going. And so there is concern that this happened. Now, one good thing had been, and I believe it's on the next slide, is that in essence, when we were doing those earlier furloughs, I mean, sorry, the earlier shutdowns, and you
Hmm.
had furloughed employees and you had working employees. Before the Government Employer Fair Treatment Act of 2019, you didn't know if you were going to get paid.
Right.
Okay.
That's right.
You didn't know if
Yeah.
Congress was going to come back and say, okay, we're going to give you all that back
Hmm.
pay. And so this act was signed into law in the president's first administration, and it basically it guaranteed back pay. It also ensured that it applied to all future shutdowns,
Hmm.
and that when the government reopened, that employees would be paid promptly, and that accrued leave for those accepted personnel, that they were entitled to use that paid leave, and everything was compensated retroactively if there was a problem on the leave side as well. And that was very important because it helped federal employees feel, okay, we're somewhat protected now.
Right.
And recently, though, there had been this pushback we had heard from OMB, was they were reinterpreting that and
Hmm.
saying, well,
Yeah.
maybe no, this is how we shouldn't interpret it. I have since, understood that question has now been put to bed, and that the law is the law. However, there is the view that they're talking about, firing or riffing these furloughed employees so that you get around this, so you don't have to back pay them because they've been fired, right? So whether or not
Mm.
that is why this is being done,
Hmm.
we're not sure. But the material point is that I think the question of whether or not, federal employees will receive the back pay is addressed, and that piece has been put to bed. We will
Yeah.
see what the courts do with
Right.
this firing. So I just thought it was really important to talk
Right.
about
Hmm.
this
Yeah.
legislation.
And this actually was one of the issues in the IRS, because the IRS's contingency plans specifically stated that everyone shall be paid upon receipt of appropriation, whether it's continuing resolution or funding,
Hmm.
in accordance with the Government Employee Fair Treatment Act.
Hmm.
And when OMB issued that memorandum, they got everybody, it was like, what?
Yes,
So they had
exactly.
to reissue their contingency plans, that, s- being being not as direct as
Right,
they had been in the previous plan.
right.
So again, on October
Because
8th, they reissued it and did
that's
something
right.
with that statement too.
So there was kind of like a reinterpretation, but that
Yes.
reinterpretation has been reinterpreted. But I do think it's also important to note that federal contractors are not covered by this. The
Mhm.
legal guarantee for back pay doesn't extend to federal contract workers. Unlike direct federal employees, contractors' back pay is not guaranteed by law and would require separate separate legislation to compensate for back wages if it is not covered in the contract. In other words, when you shut down, your spending shuts down too, so you should still have the money there. But I think it's important to note that it doesn't. And when we talk about impacts, more broadly,
Mhm.
it does impact the private sector, and this is
That's
often
right.
one of the
That's
ways.
right. Yeah, I mean, one of the things we saw, Angela, as a part of, I think, even the plans that you were a part of drafting, is that contractors, they have obligated funding, right, in their contracts, right, so they can
Correct.
continue to carry out those contracts because they do have funding available to them,
Correct.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But even if they were doing that and submitted their invoice, there wasn't
Somebody,
somebody, a federal employee on the other
right,
side to process that payment,
right,
right? So you
right.
had delays and deferrals of being reimbursed by the
Mm-hmm.
government, which has a huge impact and trickle down
Mm-hmm.
effect on the finances of all these organizations, especially those very small businesses that the government deals with.
That's right.
Mhm.
That's right. So definitely very important. So I think this kind of segues us. So you've heard about how we got here. You've seen how the executive branch deals with it, and now we want to talk a little bit about the cost of shutdown before we go into our last segment, which is the
Mhm.
impact. So when we look at the shutdowns, if you remember earlier in the broadcast, I said that there were three main shutdowns, and the longest thus far, as we don't know how long this one will be, the longest thus far was in the 2018-2019 shutdown, which was 34 days and cost $11 billion. Um, the 95 one cost about $1.4 billion. And in fairness, there's like 5 days that it was shut down and impacted the whole government in that one. And then it was 21 days that impacted part of the government because some appropriation bills had passed,
Mhm.
as we had talked about earlier. And then the 2013 shutdown, which was the one related to the Obama administration, that one cost about 2.5 billion. Most of the costs are related to back pay and lost or of economic output. And so there are various groups, and you see the sources there on the slide, that actually track this and look at what that will be. Not sure what this will mean, for this shutdown, but obviously it will be costly because no bills were passed. That means basically the furlough impacts the entire government. And I believe I had heard there were about 2.4 million civil service employees or civilian employees, of which 1.4 million are furloughed. So again, there's a lot of cost impact as these shutdowns happen. And I would have to say it just shows you how inefficient it is. If we don't
Mhm. Yep.
communicate anything else, we want to communicate shutdowns are bad. They are
Yeah,
bad for the
that's right.
government, they
Yep.
are bad for the country, they are bad economically, and we have to do better at addressing this. And so, I don't know if
Absolutely.
Angela,
Yeah.
if you,
No,
but
I mean,
we
as federal
must be clear
employees,
about that.
you know,
Hmm.
right? As a public servant, I mean, it was honestly, I'm just going to say, it's ridiculous that we're sitting at home, right?
When
And
we
knowing
want to
under
be
the Spare
working.
Government
Yep,
Act, which a lot of people will say, well, you're going to get paid anyway. That's not the point. The point
exactly.
is that I signed up to serve the public,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And I can't serve the public because this process is broken. And there's many other reasons, as we've talked about
Yes.
in the positions here. But I would say that nearly every federal employee wants to be working.
Hmm.
They don't want to be furloughed,
Mm-mm.
waiting to be paid at some point.
Right.
No.
Right. It just it's not a good thing, and it's very just not helpful. So shifting over that just gives you a feel of the
Mhm.
costs of shutdown. So I think we wanted to segue into the impact. So,
Yep.
um,
Yeah,
I guess
we're just gonna have
we're
a
going to hold
discussion
on this
here.
slide, but
Yeah.
we're
Yep.
we just wanted to briefly talk about, okay, a government shutdown, as I've just said, it's inefficient. It is not a good thing, and we have to work that so that they don't happen. But let's talk about who does it impact, right? So it impacts you, impacts me, impacts everybody. And when you look at it, we've done some research and done some looking around, and there's a group called the American Action Forum that talks about, lost economic output or GDP as a result of shutdowns. And so they kind of categorize it in some big buckets that we want to talk about. First is reduced government spending. When government agencies pause spending on goods or services, it temporarily reduces the country's GDP, just plain and simple. We talked about, there's the public and private sectors. And if the public sector is shut down, it's going to impact the
Mhm.
private sector. Um, and again, private sector is we have contracts, we're waiting for our federal funding, there's no one to pay the bills. That those delays for private companies that rely on federal contracts, permits, loan applications, it disrupts their businesses and it leads to lost income that may not be recovered. You also have lost consumer spending as it relates to the federal government. It's a large workforce, folks. And, if federal employees reduce their household spending to compensate for these delayed paychecks, that's going to slow economic activity as well. And then there are like indirect and long term impacts, whether it's economic uncertainty, because shutdowns could be harmful to the financial markets and business confidence by creating uncertainty and complicated, decision making, the absence of key economic data. I don't know if we're producing that, if we're producing the jobs monthly, other reports that have an economic impact. And then public services are diminished because essential government services are impacted. So, for example, you can't get your Social Security card if you were going to apply for one right now because it's not considered a urgent thing. You might want your Social Security card because you may have lost it or something like that, but government shut down. And, I want to talk about this, and Angela, I want you to chime
Yeah.
in, is the impact on the morale of the federal
Right.
workforce. So we're the real public servants, we're the real civil servants.
Right.
It is just horrible when you're not sure if you're going to get paid, you're not sure now if you're going to get fired.
Right. Mhm.
Our troops are super, super important, but our federal public servants are super, super
Yep.
important too. And this really impacts that. And so I do think that people should be seized with the fact that federal workers are either working and not getting paid, and that's whether that's air traffic controllers, and we're seeing, I guess, some slowdowns in
Right.
airports, or TSA agents, or whether that is, people at other federal agencies that we've named here. It really, really does impact morale because,
Yep.
again, we want to serve. We don't want, to not be able to go in and do our jobs and not, we are motivated
Right.
by basically being there for the public good. And I think there's a lot of vilification of civil servants, and we talked about that in the first episode.
Mhm.
But really, civil servants,
Yep.
they're everybody.
And the
They're everywhere.
longer that this goes on,
Hmm.
I mean, just the worse it will get. You know, we have mortgages, we have families, right?
Hmm.
We have childcare payments that come due. Yeah, there are some resources out there, but the federal worker wants to work and be fairly compensated. So it's just the longer this goes on,
Hmm.
the the more you have to think about, oh my gosh, do I have to now get a loan? And not only that, Angelique, up on that economic uncertainty,
Hmm.
the Fed's going to be meeting, I think, October 27th or 28th, right?
Correct.
To discuss the economic condition, right? And
Hmm.
perhaps make a decision about rates,
Hmm.
rates that will impact the very loans that we might have to
Correct.
be taking out here.
That's
if
right.
this thing drags on.
That's right.
So,
So, when will it end? Only when there's a CR that's enacted. What we would advise, because who needs to end it? Basically, the administration and Congress, right? And how can we help move that along? We're citizens. Everybody reach out to your
yep,
congressman and you let them know that this is just not okay. And we need to get the government back open
we need a
and back
resolution.
operating.
Yep,
That's right.
yep,
That's
yep.
right. So I think
So
that's it
we
for
wanted
us.
to,
Yes.
yeah, if you could bring up the resources, we'll just click. We went through a lot of stuff
Yes.
here.
We did. We
So
did.
again, in order to say, well, what might be helpful to you, so we wanted to share with you the some of the resources that you might want to go check out. And the first one here is House Rule 5372. That is the only legislation or rule right now that is before the Senate. That's been voted down, I think, 8 times, maybe 9 by now, 10 by now. But if you click on that link, it will take you directly into congress.gov, and it will give you the status of it, where it is in the Senate. Right now, I think it says Senate failed, Senate failed, Senate failed.
Correct.
Okay. Um, and then the next one here is OMB Circular A11. I talked about, what do the executive agencies use as that playbook? That's the section 124 that gives you an idea. Where can I find these agency contingency plans? Well, right now they're on each agency's website. The government does not have, it used to have a place where we had them all compiled over at OMB, but we don't have that anymore. But the Federal News Network has compiled them, and we've given you the link to most of the executive branch agencies as well. And then, if you have want to know more about the Affordable Care Act and its status, we've given you the HHS, the Health and Human Services site here. And Angelique mentioned about the 24 million people, and we're coming up on November 1st. KFF, this research firm, an independent research policy firm, has compiled this tool. And you can go and find out, if you live, let's just say you live in Florida, how much more you're going to pay if you don't have the tax credit or the subsidy. Okay. So this particular tool it appears to be very, 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 very useful. I will say one thing I didn't say is that the White House has information out. So, if you feel like you want to go to the White House site, you will see a state by state impact statement of what the shutdown means in each of the states.
Mhm.
So again, I didn't put that resource up here, but I do want to mention that the White House also has a state by state impact
Mhm.
statement, and some of these things that Angelique mentioned here about economic loss and GDP and federal workers and all of those things are contained in their one pagers.
Yep.
So,
So we're a little longer than we had intended to
y-
be today. Believe it or
yes,
not, we intended to be a half hour, and we were going to do 15 minutes on the
right.
shutdown, then 15 minutes on debunking the deep state. So we hope to see you at episode 3, where we'll spend time debunking the deep state. Hopefully, the government will be
Hopefully,
opened,
fingers
and we
crossed.
won't have
Right,
to talk about shutdown again.
that's
But
right.
we think we've given you pretty much all you need to know about the shutdown. But again, we would just say contact your Congress people to ensure that they hear from you that this just it isn't okay. And so with that,
Yep.
thank you.
All right. Keep it
See you next
real.
time.
Thank you.